Sprawling encampments of unhoused people dotting many of the country's biggest cities are ubiquitous reminders of homelessness here in America. But now, a growing number of communities are taking what's being seen as punitive approach to clear them out.
Take a drive down Los Angeles' Skid Row, filled with tents, people, and growing frustration.
With homeless encampments, in a matter of hours, the nation's highest court will take up a case on just that, and it could have big implications for Bay Area cities struggling with homelessness. As NBC Bay Area's Alyssa Gord explains, local policymakers and advocacy groups will be watching closely.
Today, we delve into the pressing issue of homelessness in the United States, focusing on the city of Grants Pass, Oregon, and its legal battle over ordinances prohibiting camping and sleeping in public spaces. With approximately 38,000 residents, Grants Pass faces a homelessness crisis, with around 600 individuals lacking adequate housing. Due to the shortage of shelter beds, some individuals are forced to sleep on the streets or in parks. However, city ordinances such as anti-sleeping and anti-camping laws prohibit such actions and impose civil fines on violators. Failure to pay these fines can result in criminal penalties. This situation has led to a class action lawsuit, Grants Pass v. Johnson, challenging the constitutionality of these municipal codes. The case is rooted in established legal precedent, notably the Ninth Circuit's 2018 decision in Martin v. City of Boise, which held that the Eighth Amendment prohibits the criminalization of sleeping, sitting, or lying outside on public property for homeless individuals who lack access to shelter. The argument centers on the notion that punishing individuals for engaging in life-sustaining activities like sleeping when adequate shelter is unavailable constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Circuit ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, and now the Supreme Court has decided to review the case. This decision is somewhat unexpected, as the Supreme Court typically prioritizes cases where circuit courts hold differing opinions. However, there is widespread agreement among circuits on the issue at hand, with many decisions aligning with the Martin v. Boise precedent. The Supreme Court may align with the Ninth Circuit and determine that prohibiting individuals from engaging in essential life-sustaining activities in public spaces without providing adequate shelter options violates their constitutional protection against cruel and unusual punishment. The Boise decision specifically addresses situations where individuals involuntarily lack housing and must perform these activities in public due to the unavailability of shelter beds. However, the ruling does not extend to those who have housing or access to shelter beds. Critics argue that this issue falls under state jurisdiction rather than constitutional law, contending that the Eighth Amendment does not apply in this context. They also argue that individuals without shelter options are not confined to the city and could seek alternatives elsewhere, thus dismissing claims of cruelty or unusual punishment. As we delve into the issue of criminalizing homelessness, a common thread emerges: the inclination among those external to the community serving this population to simply make them disappear. This sentiment is echoed in various proposed solutions, even in cities typically considered liberal, which have sought relief from these restrictions. The Supreme Court's decision to take up this matter likely stems from the increasing number of cities requesting relief from these restrictions. Some argue that rulings like Boise's and now Grants Pass's constrain city officials striving to address the growing homelessness crisis. However, there's a lack of compelling evidence showing how banning unhoused individuals from public spaces effectively addresses the issue. It seems cities are more focused on making the problem vanish than solving it. A Supreme Court ruling favoring Grants Pass, essentially deeming it constitutional to prohibit camping or sleeping in public, could lead to heightened policing of unhoused individuals and the dismantling of makeshift encampments formed out of sheer necessity. Furthermore, it might empower cities to forcibly relocate involuntarily unhoused individuals to designated areas or compel them into substance abuse or psychiatric treatment programs against their will. Such actions would significantly impact a vulnerable community whose numbers have been steadily increasing in recent years. A report released at the end of 2023 revealed a troubling 12% increase in homelessness since 2022, with an estimated 653,000 individuals experiencing homelessness, marking the highest number recorded since 2007. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, homelessness had been gradually declining across the country. However, in 2021 and 2022, levels remained relatively stable as people benefited from COVID relief measures such as eviction moratoriums and student loan debt pauses. Yet, in 2023, with the lifting of these moratoriums and pauses, the pent-up devastation surged at alarming rates due to a combination of lost income, accumulated rent arrears, and a lack of proactive government intervention. A significant portion of this increase comprised individuals experiencing homelessness for the first time, driven by rising housing costs and severe inflation. Shockingly, half of all renters, totaling 22.4 million households, technically couldn't afford their rent under the commonly accepted standard that deems paying more than 30% of income on rent as unaffordable. Additionally, a staggering 63% of working adults admitted they wouldn't be able to cover a $500 emergency expense, highlighting the precarious financial situation faced by many. However, the reported numbers only scratch the surface of the housing crisis reality. Pinpointing the exact number of people living on the streets each night is challenging due to the transient nature of their existence. Furthermore, the homeless population extends beyond those sleeping rough or in shelters. Many individuals are forced to reside in motels or engage in couch surfing with friends and family, which doesn't classify them as homeless. Parents may endure shelter or street living while their unhoused children seek refuge elsewhere. The complexity of homelessness makes it difficult to track, and individuals employ various survival strategies to cope. Living without a stable home presents myriad challenges. Individuals constantly grapple with securing their next meal and finding shelter for the night, all while being vulnerable to attack and abuse. Even temporary accommodations like cars or couches offer minimal comfort and stability, hindering day-to-day functioning. Moreover, the cost of renting storage units to store belongings after losing housing can become an additional burden. In essence, homelessness perpetuates a cycle of hardship and uncertainty, posing profound challenges to those affected. Imagine trying to maintain a job when you're unsure where you'll sleep each night. How can you be effective at work if you lack housing stability? And securing a job becomes even more daunting when you haven't had access to basic amenities like showers for weeks. Children in such situations often struggle academically and socially due to the instability of their living conditions. For many unhoused individuals, semi-permanent encampments offer a semblance of stability. These encampments provide shelter, a supportive community, and access to resources from local organizations. However, they also pose safety concerns as tents don't offer the security of a locked door. While encampments aren't a long-term solution, they often appear as the best among limited options. Yet, instead of addressing the root causes of homelessness, cities invest resources in demolishing these encampments. However, this approach merely displaces the issue as new tents emerge elsewhere. This cycle exacerbates the challenges faced by unhoused individuals, making it even more difficult to break free from homelessness. Criminalizing homelessness further compounds these challenges. Individuals may incur fines for violating city ordinances, leading to criminal records that hinder future employment and housing opportunities due to background checks. Criminalizing homelessness only worsens an already dire situation, which is why the attorneys representing the plaintiffs in Grants Pass v. Johnson argue that such ordinances constitute cruel and unusual punishment. It's akin to adding insult to injury, punishing individuals who are already struggling. The treatment of people experiencing homelessness is undeniably inhumane. In the future, we may look back in disbelief at how society could have been so harsh and draconian. Unfortunately, we haven't reached that point yet, and little progress has been made since industrialization first forced people into cities, leading to the modern-day homelessness crisis. Historically, the criminalization of homelessness dates back centuries. Victorian-era vagrancy laws, for instance, were overly broad and targeted behaviors deemed suspicious or offensive by law enforcement. These laws also extended to criminalizing activities like sex work and cross-dressing, disproportionately affecting marginalized communities. Throughout history, laws criminalizing homelessness have disproportionately targeted BIPOC and LGBTQ+ individuals. Even today, these communities are impacted at higher rates compared to the white, heteronormative homeless population. While efforts were made to address housing shortages during the Great Depression and World War II, such as through the New Deal and the establishment of federal agencies like the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, systemic racism persisted. Racist zoning laws and discriminatory housing practices prevented many vulnerable individuals from benefiting fully from these initiatives. The situation worsened during the Reagan era, characterized by Reaganomics, which prioritized tax cuts for the wealthy under the guise of trickle-down economics. Reagan's economic policies also entailed significant deregulation, decentralization, and privatization, further exacerbating housing inequality and homelessness. Reagan's policies marked a significant departure from the government programs established during the New Deal era to support vulnerable populations. Instead, his administration prioritized tax subsidies for wealthy individuals and privatized low-income housing development. This shift resulted in increased poverty and, consequently, a surge in homelessness. By turning over low-income housing development to the private sector, Reagan's administration ignored the inherent flaws in relying on market forces to address affordable housing needs. The free market operates on the principle of supply and demand, but it prioritizes demand backed by financial resources. As a result, the needs of cash-poor individuals are often overlooked, leading to a lack of affordable housing options. The federal government's withdrawal from direct intervention in housing exacerbated the problem. Reagan's stance on homelessness mirrored his views on welfare, shifting blame onto individuals rather than acknowledging systemic issues. This perspective was evident in his comment that homelessness was often a matter of choice. Under Reagan, funding for subsidized housing assistance through HUD drastically declined, leaving many low-income households without support. Additionally, his deregulation policies contributed to the rapid gentrification of urban areas, displacing low-income residents and pushing them to the outskirts of cities where affordable housing was scarce. When faced with homelessness, individuals were advised to relocate, further exacerbating the problem. This approach ignored the systemic factors contributing to homelessness and failed to address the root causes of the housing crisis. The culmination of 40 years of housing privatization, compounded by the 2008 financial crisis, has created a crisis for low-income Americans. This has been exacerbated by the destabilization caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we're witnessing large private investment companies stockpiling land and properties, buying up apartment complexes, cutting corners, and raising rents to turn a profit. However, their tactics often leave tenants without homes while making housing less affordable. Additionally, the rise of Airbnb hosts buying up properties for short-term rentals further restricts the housing market, driving up prices and reducing availability for long-term renters. This adds to the burden faced by low-income individuals trying to find affordable housing. The homelessness crisis is multifaceted, with factors including unaddressed trauma, cycles of abuse and poverty, mental health issues, and substance abuse. However, the primary obstacle to addressing homelessness is the lack of affordable housing. Many people experiencing homelessness are working multiple jobs, but still can't afford rent prices, which continue to rise alongside associated costs like deposits and fees. For example, in cities like Boston, where rent prices are exorbitant, even finding an affordable apartment requires a significant financial investment up front. The growing gap between income and housing costs has put immense pressure on local governments to find solutions. However, instead of prioritizing the construction of affordable housing, Some turn to punitive measures against homeless individuals, viewing them as the problem rather than addressing systemic issues. The notion of a tough love approach to homelessness suggests that harsh measures will somehow motivate individuals to resolve their homelessness. However, this approach is typically only applied to those who are already economically disadvantaged. The Ninth Circuit's rulings in Boise and Grants Pass, requiring cities to develop alternatives to simply criminalizing homelessness, could be seen as a form of tough love. These cities should have anticipated the housing shortage crisis, which has been mounting for 4 decades, and found solutions instead of resorting to punitive measures. Instead of addressing the root causes of homelessness, local governments have developed strategies to control, demean, and remove homeless individuals from public spaces. This often involves demolishing homeless encampments without providing alternative shelter, as seen in cities like Minneapolis and Washington, D.C. Such actions are short-term solutions aimed at appeasing residents' complaints rather than implementing long-term sustainable solutions. A Washington Post poll found that 75% of D.C. residents supported shutting down encampments, reflecting a widespread desire for immediate action. However, this approach fails to address the underlying issues and perpetuates the cycle of homelessness. Local officials face pressure to act, but simply clearing encampments without providing alternatives is not the answer. The criminalization of homelessness extends beyond fines for sleeping in public spaces. Other methods include limiting access to basic necessities and resources, further marginalizing vulnerable populations. It's essential for cities to develop compassionate and effective solutions to homelessness, rather than resorting to punitive measures that exacerbate the problem. For instance, the United States lacks sufficient public restroom facilities, with only 8 per 100,000 people, similar to the situation in Botswana. Iceland, on the other hand, leads with 56 toilets per 100,000 people. Sleeping and using the restroom are basic human needs, yet for those experiencing homelessness, accessing clean facilities becomes nearly impossible. In many places, relieving oneself in public spaces can lead to criminal charges, including indecent exposure, exacerbating the challenges faced by individuals without homes. The COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbated this issue as many public restrooms were closed to prevent the spread of disease. Ironically, this lack of access to clean facilities can lead to the spread of other diseases, particularly in homeless encampments, such as hepatitis A, which spreads through fecal matter. Poor sanitation policies end up costing cities more in terms of cleaning sidewalks, treating disease outbreaks, and criminalizing individuals who lack alternatives. Beyond overt methods like arrests and relocations, cities employ subtle tactics to control and police homelessness. Urban design has historically been used to covertly control populations, including the homeless. For example, in Paris in the 1800s, streets were widened to allow the military more space to suppress protests. Similarly, in New York, infrastructure like the Long Island Southern State Parkway was designed to hinder access to public beaches for those relying on public transportation. Bright lights in urban areas deter crime and discourage homeless individuals from sleeping in public spaces. Some subway stations, like those in Los Angeles, play loud classical music to deter loitering. Hostile architecture, such as uncomfortable benches or spiked pavement, is also employed to discourage public sleeping or loitering. These designs often come at significant costs to taxpayers and perpetuate the marginalization of homeless populations. Part of the issue stems from underfunding powerful lobbying interests, influencing politicians, and our collective dehumanization of people experiencing homelessness. For centuries, the default policy response has been the criminalization of homelessness, viewing it as a problem of individual deviant behavior rather than a societal issue. This perspective leads to the misconception that homelessness is a choice, blaming individuals for their circumstances. However, the reality is that many people in the United States are just one mistake or emergency away from financial ruin, as evidenced by the fact that 63% of working adults struggle to handle a $500 emergency. This systemic vulnerability challenges the notion that homelessness is solely the result of personal failings rather than broader structural deficiencies in our society. Elected officials are influenced by both their own biases and public sentiment, with 75% of DC residents supporting the removal of homeless encampments. There's a pervasive myth that homeless individuals pose a threat to public safety, despite studies showing they are no more likely to engage in criminal activities than housed individuals. In fact, they are often victims of violent crimes themselves. The pressure to remove visible homelessness is also driven by aesthetic concerns and property values, with powerful interests pushing for solutions that simply relocate the issue rather than address its root causes. Instead of investing in affordable housing, blame is shifted onto homeless individuals, many of whom face discrimination based on race, gender, or sexual orientation. While some states and localities lack the resources to fund affordable housing initiatives, others face opposition from the business and housing development community, as well as affluent residents who resist the integration of low-income housing into their neighborhoods. This perpetuates the cycle of homelessness and systemic inequality, further marginalizing vulnerable populations. The federal government also bears responsibility in addressing the housing crisis. Currently, the lack of a national housing policy and limited budget constrain the efforts of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Instead, much of the work regarding housing affordability falls under the Treasury Department and the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which incentivize private companies to build affordable housing through mortgage subsidies and rent subsidies. However, HUD's effectiveness has diminished over time, with the current HUD secretary lacking housing expertise and the agency's budget largely directed towards voucher programs like Section 8. Yet, obtaining these vouchers is challenging due to lengthy waiting lists, and recipients often face discrimination from landlords unwilling to accept them. Unlike entitlement programs such as SNAP benefits or Medicaid, Section 8 vouchers are not universally accessible. Despite the federal government's inability to regulate land use, there are measures it could take within its jurisdiction. For example, expanding tax credits like the child tax credit or the low-income housing tax credit could provide direct financial support to those experiencing housing insecurity. Additionally, the government could allocate more funding to states grappling with high housing costs, make Section 8 vouchers an entitlement program, and expedite skilled immigration to address labor shortages in the construction industry. HUD could also play a more proactive role by advising and monitoring local governments' housing initiatives. However, the influence of money in politics remains a significant barrier to meaningful reform, with powerful lobbying groups like the National Association of Realtors shaping housing policy. While systemic change is necessary to address the root causes of homelessness, individuals can also make a difference by supporting local shelters through donations of funds, clothing, food, and personal care items. Thank you for joining us for exploring that it's crucial to advocate for policies that prioritize affordable housing, access to necessities, and supportive services for homeless individuals.